Hey guys, today we're talking about the Proclamation of 1763. Now, this is a big deal because it's among some of the earliest interferences of the government on the colonists' lives. And so we're going to take a look at exactly what it is, why it had such a big impact. First thing we have to understand is that in order to, well, let's first take a look at the map here. The pink area that you see, that had been French. When they lost the 7 Years' War or the French-Indian War, they were forced to give all that land up to the British. Now, the barrier between what had been British and had been French were the Appalachian Mountains, kind of the crest of the Appalachian Mountains. And British colonists were not allowed to go west of that line because that was no longer their territory. Then they were impeding upon the French. Well, after the war is over, all of a sudden now that's British territory. And so what they're doing is they're looking at, hey, we get to move west now. We get to go to some of those really fertile lands. The problem was that there were a lot of Native American tribes, and they were getting hostile. They did not want the encroachment on their lands by the British. The war had been so expensive, this war with the French had been so expensive, that the British were not all that interested in having to defend something else. So in order to keep the peace between the British Empire and the Native Americans in North America, they created what was called the Proclamation of 1763. And it basically said that nobody is allowed to settle west of that line. Well, the colonists were understandably, I think, upset. They're asking questions, well, why did we fight a war? Why did we sacrifice? Why did we give our sons, our brothers, women, why did they give their husbands to defend Great Britain in this war if it wasn't for new lands? They got all this new land out of the deal, and now they wanted the opportunity to settle those areas. And now Great Britain is saying, no, we fought, we died, it was expensive, there were sacrifices to be made, but there's basically going to be no gain. Nothing that we get to reap the rewards from. And so the colonists were very upset by that. Now, understand that prior to this, for 150 years, we had experienced what was called salutary neglect. And that was basically non-interference by the British monarch in the affairs of the people of North America. Well, you can imagine that in 150 years, the people of North America had become extremely independent and very self-sufficient, right? So if they can settle a new land, if they can, economically survive and even thrive without the interference of the government, then why now all of a sudden is the government poking their head in? And when they do, it really feels, I don't know, it's rough on those colonists, right? Because they're going, we did just fine without you. Now you're making our lives harder. Now you're putting restrictions in place that are limiting our ability to do what we've always done. So salutary neglect ends with this proclamation. Now, the colonists looking for new farmland, right? As more and more people come, there's greater demand for farmland. And the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys, particularly the Ohio River Valley, very fertile ground. So the colonists are deciding that, you know what, we're going to go anyway. That's British territory. Yes, there's a proclamation, but we've said in this class, land equals opportunity. And they're looking at this going, that's unclaimed land. That's land that is ripe for the taking. We can do great things there. So they decide that they're going to go against the wishes, not all of them, right? But some of them are going to go against the wishes of the crown. They're going to break the proclamation and they're going to go anyway. Well, they were warned by the monarch, right? By Parliament. They say, listen, if you cross that line, you are forfeiting the protection of the crown. You can go, but if you go without any royal protection. And I can only imagine the colonists' response. It was probably somewhere between a smirk and an outright laugh, right? Because the reality is 150 years the monarchy had not been there to protect them from Native Americans. They hadn't been there to set up courts of law and like all these different kinds of things. Like they had just been kind of hands off. So these very independent-minded colonists had relied on themselves. And now the idea that they weren't going to have the monarchy to rely on was laughable to them because they never really had. So they were, see ya, we're out, right? We're going. We're going to go where the opportunity lies. So a great number of really adventurous colonists, brave, bold, and desperate for opportunity, they laughed at the threat. And then they left for new lands in the West. Now, when we talk about the West, we're not talking about the Great Plains or the Rocky Mountains or the West Coast. We're talking about like Ohio, right? At that point, that was West for them. Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana. And so they're moving out West. So this is often kind of ignored, but the proclamation serves as a reminder for the colonists of the power and the intrusion of the crown. For a long time, they had lived without either of those things in their lives. And now all of a sudden, there are more troops, there are more laws, there's more interference, and it's kind of rubbing them the wrong way. They're going to bristle at the idea that the crown can be that influential, that the crown can tell them what they can and can't do in their daily lives, when for literally generations, they haven't done so, right? The crown hasn't interfered for generations. So the proclamation really does serve as the first example of royal interference and infringements upon what we would deem maybe individual liberties. So anyway, that's what makes this important. It's also important, I think, and shows a little bit of the attitude of the colonists that we went anyway, that we were willing to kind of brush aside the desires of the crown and go, no, we're going to go where we find opportunity. Both things are really very telling. So anyway, that's the Proclamation of 1763. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Watch any of the other videos that we post. And thanks for watching, guys.